This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to announce the release of my new book, Obama's True Legacy, How He Transformed America. There's a reason why Mike Huckabee calls it a ferocious and chilling read. Order it now at Amazon.com or at FrontPageMag.com. Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, another fantastic program with another fantastic guest. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember we're a fan-generated program. We need all the help we can get, and especially because shadow banning and persecution continues of the Glazov Gang. Please go to YouTube and Rumble. That's where our channels are. Please subscribe to us there. Press instant notifications. Press like and leave lots of comments. Tell all your friends about it. Go to jamieglazov.com. Check out what we're doing there. Subscribe to our newsletter on that site. If you're in a giving mood, we have a donate button on jamieglazov.com. On X, on Facebook, and on Instagram, and on Getter, we are at Jamie Glazov. Most importantly, our wonderful producer, who is a freedom fighter. She's on the front lines fighting for freedom around the world, and at this moment, especially for the persecuted and tortured people in Iran that are suffering tremendously under the evil mullahs. Please support her at liveuptofreedom.com. It is always such an honor and privilege and pleasure to have with us this evening Daniel Greenfield, the CEO of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. He's the editor of the wonderful blog, The Point, and he's the editor of the Freedom Center's new pamphlet, Somalimerica. It's Somalimerica, The Rise of Somali Fraud, Crime, and Terror in America. Daniel, welcome to the program.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jamie.
I have a little bit of difficulty with it. It's not Somali America, it's Somalimerica, right?
Somalimerica. You just do the Somali and America part. It's easier to see it in print than it is to actually say it out loud.
Somalimerica, but that's what we're turning into. And your pamphlet is terrifying in terms of what it's showing. And that's just one microcosm of the jihadization, Islamification, and Shariaization, if those are some words I can use, that are happening in our country. I think Europe's already gone. Canada's sinking. I mean, we've been yelling from the rooftops about this for what, a quarter of a century now? Daniel, welcome to the program. Before I get into your important pamphlet, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now.
Well, like a whole lot of you, I'm really concerned about what's happening to this country, for that matter, what's happening to the world, to the entire Western world. And I'm doing what I can to push back against it. By working with the David Horowitz Freedom Center, we are bringing attention to urgent issues like, yes, we were reporting on Somali fraud, Somali crime, Somali terrorism, and as you know well, at Front Page Magazine going back a decade. And we're still at it right now, and that's just one of the major issues we're tackling day after day.
Okay, tell us about your pamphlet.
So Somalimerica collects a lot of our great reporting. Again, stuff you've overseen back in the day, going back to at least 2018. We're tracking not just the stuff that's in the front pages, though we were tracking it well before it was in the front pages. We delve into the scale and the scope of the terrorism. For example, we talk about the Portland Christmas tree lighting bombing plot in Portland, which most people have forgotten about, by a Somali. We talked about a case that has hardly been in the news, which involved a Somali getting training as an airline pilot and plotting to fly an airliner into the Bank of America tower in Atlanta, which could have killed thousands of people. We're talking about the terrorism, we're also talking about the fraud. We were really one of the first on the fraud within the autism sector. We've been tracking fraud along, but also looking not just in Minneapolis, not just in Minnesota, looking at the situation in Maine and Oregon and San Diego. People don't realize that some of it's been happening actually in San Diego, California. So we've also been looking at the rise in Somali crime. Again, not just in Minneapolis. We've actually looked at some of the horrifying sexual assaults committed by Somalis in Minneapolis, what's really behind all these riots, all these anti-ICE protests is ICE has been arresting foreign criminals, including Somalis, including Somali rapists and pedophiles, and tracking them for deportation. And a lot of these mobs have been gathering to protect them. We've actually looked at some of the horrifying sexual assaults committed in Minneapolis just by Somali men named Muhammad, taking after their prophet, in which they actually got a pass. You have horrific crimes against women, against children, and the perpetrators would just really get practically nothing, or they'd get a few years in prison. They'd be right out again. They'd commit more crimes. So this is something that we've been tracking. We're very aware of, and we're trying to get attention to as much as possible.
But Daniel, and you're doing an excellent job, and so are a lot of our writers and our researchers. But the very fact that we have to do this says something, doesn't it? Because number one, there's a cover-up. And there's a cover-up because there's complicity from very high levels. So the governments there and the authorities there are complicit in this, and they're trying to cover all this up, right?
Absolutely. No, I mean, we can go right to Minneapolis where they caught them doing this fraud, this actually daycare fraud back in 2015. They went through a legal process there, and the outcome of the legal process was that two of the billers for the daycare centers were told that they had to wait 2 years before they could bill the federal government again. Millions of dollars were wasted on the legal process just to restrict them for only 2 years. One of these guys is actually a Somali senator, and he still votes in Minnesota elections. So they were aware of this going back a decade. They did absolutely nothing about it because they were benefiting from it. And this is true across the country. You have politicians coming out claiming that Somalis built America. Somalis built Boston, the mayor of Boston insisted. Forget all the Irish, forget all the America's patriots. The Somalis built Boston. I mean, this is what replacement literally looks like. And the reason that they're pushing this replacement is because this is their new voting base. This is their new base of support. They want to bring in as many Somalis, as many third worlders in general, as many Islamists as possible in order to make this the new America, the one that will always vote for Democrats on the left. We've seen how they do this in Europe. We're now seeing it play out in America.
What's going on with these daycare centers?
Well, what we've had with the Somalis is a culture of fraud. So with daycare centers, with the autism centers, with adult daycare centers, with any kind of healthcare setup, what they do is they get into a government program. They abuse it as much as possible. They recruit people to sign up for the program. Sometimes they fake names. My favorite fake daycare child name was Serious Problem. That was the name, Serious Problem. But in many cases, they actually get actual parents. They bribe those parents. They get them to sign up their kids. The kids, of course, never actually go there. And then they cash in.
Wonderful. You also document in your pamphlet, Daniel, that there's a lot of these Somalis that are actually traveling around the world and to certain areas and joining Al-Qaeda and ISIS and coming back. What's going on there?
So we've had for a while the situation where Somalis were joining the local Al-Qaeda affiliate in Africa, which is operating in Somalia. It's operating it's carried out attacks in Nigeria and other places. It's killed multiple Americans. It played a role in the Battle of Mogadishu when Americans were tricked into going in to save Somalis from themselves from another fake UN famine. So we've had significant numbers of Somalis, I've seen dozens of people actually traveling, and those are the ones we are aware of, the ones we are caught, who are traveling, who are getting training, who were working with Al-Qaeda, and in some cases trying to come back to the United States. And they obviously represent a major security risk.
How about the sexual assaults happening in Minneapolis? That's a terrifying section of the pamphlet.
Yeah, we've had a disturbing situation, as mentioned, where you've had really just bold, blatant stuff like a Somali guy just going around the backyard, seeing a girl playing there, asking where her mother is, coming back and sexually assaulting her, and by the way, once again, getting a pass on it from local authorities. It's not just that the assaults are happening, it's just how blatant they are. We've had a Somali who took a woman and her sister, held them at gunpoint, threatened to kill the sister if The other one did not submit to him. He pretty much got a pass. He was arrested for assaulting yet again. Before that, they traced him to yet another assault of a 15-year-old girl. We're seeing kind of the situation we've seen in the UK, where you would have these Pakistani Muslims just assaulting girls, and the police and the authorities conspiring to give them a pass. So this is the situation in Minnesota, Minneapolis, from the top down.
Well, one could ask why we need these people here. But then again, we don't want to be racist and Islamophobic. It's just, it continues. I don't know if it amazes me anymore, but it's quite depressing how we commit suicide on the altar of these utopian ideals. Our civilization and society cannot say what Islam is and what Islam fertilizes. And so even this pamphlet is not welcome in our establishment media, by the authorities, by the government, because it leads to certain conclusions that our civilization unfortunately can't make. And because it can't make those conclusions, I don't know, maybe that's why 250,000 UK little girls have been raped and tortured by Muslim rape gangs in the last 20 years. And that's, by the way, a conservative figure. Some people say it's up to 1 million. But our society cannot say that a Muslim cab driver should be looked at more carefully by authorities than an old white nun walking down the street. We can't say that one is more suspicious than the other. And that's our suicide. Daniel, Ilhan Omar has some interesting friends that are part of this Somali business, right? There's something there with the restaurant that hosted her victory party. There's some guy there that was part of some $250 million meal fraud or something.
Yeah, my favorite story out of all this case, and this was, by the way, what really got the ball rolling nationwide, was the meal fraud, where they were supposed to be feeding kids. And this went from a few $1 million in charges to over $200 million charges toward the end, for a total of over $250 million. Now, one of the facilities involved, they were supposed to be feeding all these thousands and thousands of Somali kids, more kids than existed, a total, I think, about 3.9 million meals, which would be enough to feed all the kids in Somalia. And one of them was a place called the Safari Restaurant. And the Safari Restaurant served traditional Somali cuisine like fried chicken and French fries. And it claimed to be feeding thousands and thousands of kids. And they asked this guy from the Safari Restaurant, which is the place where Ilhan Omar held her victory party. She had a campaign video where she was delivering meals outside the Safari Restaurant. And they asked this guy, how is it possible that you were serving all these meals? And he explained, well, everybody in Minneapolis was coming to Safari Restaurant. This guy was also, by the way, charged with threatening to kill a witness.
And we are now living in Somalimerica, also, as you say, Americistan. And it's going to get worse. We don't want it to get worse. We're trying to fight it. It won't get worse if Americans and the majority of Americans get over this Stockholm syndrome with Islam. But it's very iffy. And we really face a crisis in that way, right, Daniel? Because my main interest, in terms of what I research, we know what Islam is. I'm very interested in the psychology of the people who, if you come to them and say, there was a Muslim rape gang that just raped a little girl in England, and when the parents came to save her, they arrested the parents and they arrested the little girl and they let the Muslim rapists go. This is actually what's happening. And when you tell that to the people that are in charge of our society, and many of the people we know, their first response is, well, not all Muslims do that. And then they go and have a really nice sleep. Instead of saying, wow, that poor girl, why did the authorities arrest her and the parents? Why didn't they arrest those Muslim rapists? Is there something in the Quran that inspires and sanctions them to rape non-Muslim girls? Let me find out about these verses that the Muslim rapists themselves proclaim while they're raping the girls. Maybe this has something to do with Islam. That's just totally impossible for our society and civilization. It can't go in that direction. And that is our suicide, right, Daniel?
Absolutely, and I believe you have a book on that note, United in Hate, which explains
Yeah.
the alliance between the left and Islam. And the left sees Islam as valuable because our society is painted as evil. It's
Yeah.
oppressive, it's totalitarian, it's too white, it's too male, it's too Christian, it's too whatever, it's too Western, and it needs
Hmm.
to be destroyed. And thus, the Muslims are always the oppressed, and whatever they do is entirely justified. So, if they're raping little girls, that's great because really they're lashing out at this colonial, imperialistic, patriarchal structure. We've had a long history of radical leftists and their political allies actually justifying the use of rape. I mean, we can look at October 7th in Israel. We can look at members of the Black Panthers talking about how raping white women was an insurrectionary, revolutionary act.
Absolutely, Daniel. And there's about 200 chapters in this book. I'm using a metaphor. When I say this book right now, what I mean is this phenomenon of Islam denial and jihad denial. And but what I wanted to say was the points you had just made are absolutely brilliant and dead on. I just wanted to add some of the other stuff that I've researched and been thinking about since I was, believe it or not, a teenager, because I caught on to this at a very early age. But there's a deep narcissism and selfishness of the leftist as well, or the people infected by the leftist mindset. Because if you say that it's radical Islam and just the extremists, Islam is okay, it's just those bad people, then you can kind of go to sleep at night because these people have such an emotional incapacity to face the truth. They need to feel that everything is okay and that they have some control over the situation. They can hug a member of the religion of peace, maybe give him some money, give him some land, and then everything will be okay. But if you accept that it's Islam, you've got a really big problem on your hands. And we have a really big problem on our hands. And I would say that the majority of people, for the sake of their own emotional incapacity and for the feeling that they can control things, they don't want to accept the truth. It's a very, very selfish, cowardly, self-centered way of denying the truth, right?
Absolutely. If you actually deal with the fact that Islam itself is the problem, that it's
Yeah.
not just a tiny minority, then you have to deal with a really scary concept. And now we have this also with communism and the left. You had
Yeah.
this idea, well, it's just the Stalin. Stalin was bad, but communism itself was not the problem. Or maybe it's communism, but Marxism can be good. And, you
Yeah.
can play this game, and we've been playing this game throughout the Cold War. And
Yeah.
yet, time and time again, it all ends in death, and it ends in bloodshed, and it ends in murder. And yes, I mean, Stalin may have been worse than, let's say, Khrushchev, and ISIS may be worse than, say, Al Qaeda, and Al Qaeda may be worse than, say, some particular Islamic group. The bottom line, though, is it's a common agenda and it has common roots and it has common cores, and the violence is an inevitable part of it. It's not extremism that causes the violence. So in some movements, it can be extremism that causes the violence, but here it's the movement itself, its ideology that itself causes the violence.
Absolutely. And of course, I want people to get my new book, United in Hate. And of course, we want people to get Somalimerica. But we always have to bring up, thank you, Daniel. Thank you. I appreciate that. But we also have to promote and talk about very vital other works because Kenneth Levin, his book, The Oslo Syndrome, he's written about exactly what we're talking about, Daniel. And that's how people under siege, what happens to them. Because throughout the whole Oslo narrative, Kenneth shows that beyond all reasonable doubt, it was clear that Oslo was not going to work because you're dealing with people who want to exterminate you. But there was so much self-delusion that we just give some land, we give some money, we give some hugs, and everything will be okay. So this is part of jihad denial, and it's why we're starting to live in Somalimerica. Where do people get it, Daniel? I'll say very quickly, at the Front Page Bookstore at frontpagemag.com. But what would you say?
Well, I'd say you can get both United in Hate, Somalimerica, and many other great books and pamphlets over at the Front Page Mag store.
Daniel, I could maybe hire you as my publicist. Could you maybe go to the grocery store holding my book like that?
I think I'd probably be arrested. Wait, actually, I'm no longer in LA, so I'm probably not going to be arrested.
Right? Well, thank you, Daniel. You're not just a great scholar, but also a great publicist and media agent. Daniel, you are writing about so everybody get Somalimerica, okay?
And get United in Hate.
Get United in Hate. But Daniel is starting something else that's very exciting and very vital and very crucial, because we need to start holding bad judges accountable. And that's why Daniel Greenfield says it's time for a judicial accountability project, because so many of our federal judges are just out of control. Daniel, tell us about it.
Well, we have an insane situation in which one of 677 lifetime federal judges, not Supreme Court judges, federal district judges, can go ahead and any one of them can block the president. So that's called a temporary injunction. And we did not have them at all in America until 1963. Then, under the entire Obama administration, 8 years of the Obama administration, we just had 19 of these injunctions filed by federal judges. In half of 1 year of the Trump administration, 2025, we had 80 of these. What that means is leftist lawyers, they find a friendly judge, and there's plenty of Obama and Biden and Clinton judges that are friendly to them. They find one of these judges, they go to one of these judges and they say, well, the Trump administration is doing this. We don't want to do it. We don't want this done because, well, we don't want to enforce the law. We don't want to see criminals arrested. We don't want to see illegal aliens deported. We don't want to see projects that we support, like U.S. aid, actually blocked. Pretty much anything the Trump administration has done, there have been lawsuits filed against it. We don't want to see money being pulled from radical leftist organizations. And they go and they find a judge to offer this immediate injunction. And at this point, the only relief for the administration is to run to the Supreme Court and urgently say, well, this one of 677 federal judges here has decided to block what the president of the United States is doing. Then the Supreme Court has to urgently issue it has to urgently block this injunction on what is being called by liberals the shadow docket. This is obviously a completely unsupportable situation because you've got 9 Supreme Court justices to block decisions coming from 677 federal judges. The Supreme Court partially tried to block some of this with a ruling in the Glazov v. Trump, but it's really not enough, and we still have federal judges doing this. Now, the bottom line is people tend to think, well, there's no answer here. There's no solution, except maybe the Congress can impeach some federal judges. But an important point that really has been overlooked is that what the Constitution states, first of all, the Constitution has no rule for these federal district judges at all. They have a Supreme Court. They have no federal district judges. But secondly, what the Constitution says is they serve during times of good conduct, good behavior. So what does good behavior mean? Well, what they're doing is very clearly not good behavior. They're illegally and illegitimately asserting authority to block a president. They're using a means that did not even exist until 1963. The first 175 years of America, there was no such thing as this. So what we're actually going to do is we're profiling federal judges, we're profiling abuses, misconduct by federal judges, things that may not necessarily be impeachable, but things which Congress has the power to respond to. Because the bottom line is these behaviors are not examples of good behavior. They're not examples of good conduct. And Congress has a role in stepping in and saying that, calling in these judges and saying to them, what you're doing is not fall under good behavior, and we can actually remove you potentially short of impeachment. And I think it's really important for Congress to actually begin regulating judges, because we've seen the federal judiciary completely get out of control to the point that a president is functionally powerless. And that if any one of 677 judges can override a democratically elected president, then basically we're living in a judicial tyranny. And that's not what the founding fathers, it's not what the framers of the Constitution meant us to be living.
Thank you, Daniel, for making an effort and fighting on all these realms, because I think at one time a lot of these lunatics and people who wanted to destroy America just had a beard and were teaching some class at university. But now they're judges, they're our leaders, they're our politicians, and there are mayors. It's a very frightening situation. When I was reading your work on this, it just jaw-dropping when you just see all of these examples. There was one with this character, Judge Sparkle Suknanen, if I'm pronouncing it right, former foreign national appointed by Biden. But this individual ruled that Trump couldn't even hold illegal alien gang members at Gitmo. I mean, there's a lover of America, right?
Yeah, it's great when we have these foreign federal judges, foreign immigrant federal judges. We've got Judge Ali, who a Muslim judge who was originally a Canadian national and moved to this country and immediately can override the president of the United States, which is an interesting situation because the president has to be born in the United States, but you can have a foreigner come in and become a federal judge and exert more power than the president does. Pretty sure that's not what the framers of the Constitution had in mind. We have a number of these foreign nationals that actually were appointed to federal judgeships. And also, it's important to note that these judges in many cases are not even citing any really meaningful laws. They're not saying that President Trump actually went ahead and broke a constitutional principle. What they're saying in many cases is, well, we just don't like it. It's just really not very nice. It's irresponsible. We think it's irresponsible. And if we think it's irresponsible, then it violates the Administrative Procedures Act or the APA, which 90% of the stuff is what they're focusing on. The APA was created as a means of regulating the bureaucracy under FDR. It's not a means for a federal judge to go ahead and say, I don't like what the president is doing, and therefore I'm going to stop it. So this is basically a judicial coup, one that we intend to stop. And the David Horowitz Freedom Center is collecting this database with Discover the Networks. We're collecting examples of judicial misbehavior, judicial abuses of power. And we're actually going to go to Congress and inform Congress that they have the power, they have the authority to make meaningful changes.
Well, we can do some of this stuff because, look, our great Robert Spencer just gave a testimony in front of a congressional committee, so that was great, and hopefully we'll see you talking about this in front of a congressional committee. Just tell our viewers one more time what to look out for in terms of this new project at Front Page.
Well, the announcement is right there on frontpagemag.com under the editorship of Jamie Glazov. It's right there. It's called the Judicial Accountability Project. We've begun actually assembling a list of profiles of about 15 federal judges. It's right there in the top article. It's linked to it, Discover the Networks. And we're continuing to develop. We're continuing to gather data and work to hold this out-of-control judicial tyranny accountable.
Thank you, Daniel, for fighting to try to keep America alive and to try to fix all of these horrible problems. I mean, I would just like to see a lot of these foreign gang members deported out of the United States, but oops, I'm being racist. We're going to take a sponsor break. We're going to be right back.
I hear every day about the products you all wish MyPillow carried. Well, guess what? We probably do. Slippers, bathrobes, pet beds, blankets, mattresses, sleepwear, loungewear, duvets, comforters, pot holders, aprons, oven mitts, and so much more. And they're all on sale. For example, get our best-selling standard MyPillows for only $14.98. Body pillows, $29.98. 6-piece bath towels or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And I've never done this before. When you spend $100 or more, you're going to get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
And that's right. Make sure to go to mypillow.com or mystore.com and use promo code GG21. You can get a discount of up to 60% off all the amazing products. You're going to be helping out the Glazov Gang as well as the great Mike Lindell. And if you like one-of-a-kind handmade art, make sure to go to lutfstudio.com and purchase resin art pieces made by our producer, the wonderful and the great freedom fighter, Annie Cyrus. Use promo code GLAZOV to get special discounts. You're going to be helping out the Glazov Gang as well as Annie Cyrus. We are back with the great Daniel Greenfield. Daniel, well, we've got another transgender mass shooter. You know, these transgenders, they would just stop shooting people if we accepted them. You know, so that's the leftist version. My version is as a Christian, and I think that we share some similarities in terms of our faith, but perhaps we differ on some focuses in terms of how evil works. But in the Christian perspective, the more you sin, that's why we all have to be so careful. Demons attach themselves to us. So in my perspective, when you start trying to change your gender, you just might get possessed. And then when you get possessed, you start going on mass murdering sprees. So maybe it's not a good idea to mutilate people and mutilate children and tell them that they're a different gender that they already are. But I guess what's the word? Being transphobic. But another terrible development in Canada, and this individual killed a lot of women and a lot of girls. What happened, Daniel?
Well, we've been told for so long that we need to have gun control just like Canada. We need to follow suit in Canada. And well, it turns out the problem wasn't gun control, was transgender control. So, you have a basic situation where somebody is mentally unstable. In the past, if somebody thought they were a chicken, well, we treat that as a mental problem. And if somebody who was a boy thought he was a girl, we treat that as a mental problem. Instead, now we actually have an entire medical industry prescribing off-label prescription pharmaceuticals to specifically try to claim that somebody can change their sex. Then they impose dangerous surgeries on top of that. They pump them full of hormones. And best of all, they start this process early on, because you're talking about somebody, in this case, who began undergoing a gender transition 4 to 6 years ago, which means at that time they were 12, 13. This is really horrific. And if you can imagine the kind of psychological damage being done to a boy, to a 12-year-old, 13-year-old boy who is being transitioned, pushed into being a girl, prescribed all sorts of horrifying pharmaceuticals, being pumped full of hormones, and then, yes, well, he shoots a bunch of people. That's not exactly a huge surprise, because we've had this as a trend. We've had repeated transgender mass shootings. We've had them in schools. We've had them in other places, because the bottom line is, instead of treating psychological problems, they're actually creating psychological problems. Now, I know it is more lucrative to create psychological problems than to treat them. Now, that's been a problem with this particular industry for quite a while, but never has it been quite as this bad, quite as egregious as it is with the entire transgender mania. And they're desperately trying to ignore this. This is why the media headlines are talking about a woman shoots a bunch of people in a school for no reason, 18-year-old woman in a dress. Well, the 18-year-old woman in a dress turns out to be a troubled 18-year-old man who was, horrifically abused, really, by the medical establishment, by members of his family who went along with this. And the result is that at some point he snapped, and being a man, and he was never going to stop being a man no matter if he wore a dress or not, being a man who wanted to be a woman, he ended up killing his mother, who was very supportive of him and condemned all the haters. And he killed a female teacher, and he killed a number of girls in the school along with 2 other boys. That's absolutely horrifying. And you don't have to think too hard to understand the psychology behind this. It's a psychology that the media will never admit to. It's a psychology that the establishment will never admit to, because then they have to accept the complicity in the abuse of women and girls. We were talking about the abuse of women and girls by Muslim migrants before this. This is similar enough. This is a system that is enabling the abuse of women and girls, that actually denies the existence of women and girls, that insists that a man who claims to be a woman should be able to go ahead, like the Algerian Muslim boxer in the Olympics, and punch women in the face, or like a recent case with a wrestler, should be able to physically violate a woman. And they claim that this is actually feminism. And this is what their version of transgender feminism leads to. It leads to dead women and girls.
Well, thank you, Daniel. There's a video of this guy howling, laughing. And you don't need to watch The Exorcist. Just take a look at that video of how he's howling with laughter. And if you don't believe in the spiritual world, you might just want to take a look at that video. But the media that calls this shooter a woman, their hands are soaked in the blood of the victims, because they are enabling the entire problem and enabling what this guy did and enabling future shooters. Over to another dark topic. You've written a powerful blog recently. 1/4 billion women and girls were mutilated by Islamic FGM practices, female genital mutilation. Glazov Gang has been keeping an eye on this for a very long time. I've been trying to fight this battle for not just years, but decades on behalf of Muslim girls, and all girls, but especially Muslim girls, because they're the main victims of female genital mutilation, because it's Islam that mandates it, and it's all in the Hadith. When you try to get rid of it in places like Egypt, they've made efforts. The imams and the muftis and the clerics all start pointing to Islamic teachings to try to keep FGM in place. But once again, mass denial about this. And in your blog, you write about how the UN, when it covers this, is claiming that FGM is Christian, Jewish, and European. Tell us about it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you think of FGM, you definitely think of Jews and, of course, Christians. Well, you have this split screen. On the one hand, the UN and various so-called feminist and human rights groups want to end FGM. On the other hand, of course, they can't talk about who's doing this. We have this with a number of other areas, including domestic violence. You have the highest rates of domestic violence in Muslim countries. You also have this with some other areas, including the, I should mention, by the way, that the Quran itself explicitly licenses domestic abuse, which Jewish and Christian scripture absolutely does not. But you have this in a number of areas. They've done this with polygamy, polygamous marriage, and they also refuse to mention that there's only one religion that licenses polygamous marriage, which is again Islam. So they play this game where it's it's everybody's problem. Jews and Christians have this issue with FGM and polygamy and and all this, and they can't talk about Islam. So somewhere down and say, well, there's a bit of a Muslim problem, but it's really not that big of a deal, and we really need to tell all the Christians to stop doing the FGM stuff. It's obviously beyond being hypocritical and dishonest. It means you're never going to address the problem because you can't even talk about what the problem is. Going back to Somalimerica a little bit, one of the things I discussed was actually the Hennepin County, which is Minneapolis. Their hospitals were seeing a lot of cases with Somali women coming in with large scale cases of FGM in those communities, and it's pretty extreme. Their version of FGM that they do is really causes, I don't want to get too graphic here, but causes severe damage, incontinence, inability not just to enjoy normal marital relationships, but also seriously endangers their lives, especially during pregnancy. So initially, officials would say, this is unacceptable, we cannot tolerate this. Then they got this DI mandate where the hospital would actually say, we need to really check our own privilege. We need to learn from these women. We need to learn about their culture. Western culture emphasizes individualism, whereas Islamic culture, Somali Islamic culture emphasizes collectivism and the importance of the word of Allah, and we need to be respectful of that. So this is what you get over and over again. Rather than actually trying to address the problem, the moment you identify FGM as a Muslim problem, that's the moment FGM ceases to be a problem. We see this with Islamic terrorism. We see this with so many other things. So they can't actually admit that FGM is an Islamic problem, because if they admit FGM is an Islamic problem, it stops being a problem. The only way they can even fight FGM is by denying that it is an Islamic problem. And this is an obvious paradox that makes the whole thing impossible.
No, absolutely. And again, we get back to what I've dedicated my life to studying and exposing. Just this reluctance, if it's Islam, just if that comes up, and I can always feel it, just even on this issue, if I talk to somebody, for instance, if there's a person in general and you say, hey, you like ribeye or do you like T-bone? Have each steak and then we'll see which one you like. And the person will go, oh, okay, let me see and I'll make a decision afterwards. That's not their disposition if you approach them and say, is Islam the problem or is Islam the problem? It's not, okay, present the evidence and I'll see which one it is. They're already predisposed. They can't accept that it's Islam. And this is tremendously evil. And in my experience, I really hate these people, especially with my efforts on FGM and honor killings to protect Muslim girls, because you approach these people and if you say, look what's happening to these poor girls in Somalia, in Iraqi Kurdistan, in Sudan, in Mauritania, in Indonesia, and in Malaysia, and you say they're having their genitals cut off with broken glass, and the person says, "Oh, well, not only Muslims do that," and then they go have a really nice sleep. But what if it is, it's like, why don't you really care about those victims? Why don't you learn if it is Islam and try to stop it and try to protect those Muslim girls? They would never do that because they're so heartless and callous. But on that issue, I just want to add that yes, there are non-Islamic environments where this happens. But even the campaigners and the human rights activists will tell you it is so much easier to change things in those places, even though it's much less and fewer than in the Islamic world. But when you approach and say, hey, this is wrong in terms of what you're doing and this is why it's wrong, in those cases, those people can't go to somewhere in the Torah and somewhere in the New Testament and say, oh, no, we have to cut the clitoris off. That doesn't exist, so it's very easy to change these things. And it has to be stressed that why it exists in those non-Muslim places and areas and cultures is because they're influenced by the neighboring Islamic cultures as well. But anyway, I just want to say that the reliance of the traveler, Abu Dawood, Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, these are the foundations to FGM in Islam. And this is why the authorities in Islam and the gatekeepers of Islam keep FGM in check. Daniel, would you like to add something to this?
One key point is that you only have really one religion that still has theocracies, which is Islam. So when you have religious law, when you have Sharia Islamic law, then there's really no way to push back against it. You can't meaningfully reform it. Or rather, what is considered reform in the Muslim world is to go back to the foundational texts of Islam, which of course worsens everything for everybody. So there's no actual way out of this trap except secularization. And of course, secularization is met with jihadist violence.
What would you suggest is something that human rights activists can do to try to battle this and try to protect Muslim girls from female genital mutilation?
Well, we have to get back to what we discussed, which is that you have to deal with the Islamic factor. If you try to deny the Islamic factor, you're really going to get nowhere. I mean, it is Islamic ideology that is at the core of it. The same Islamic ideology in Islamic law that licenses and encourages actually beating women also effectively is used to license and encourage FGM, because the idea is that women are fundamentally untrustworthy in Islam. That's why you have multiple Islamic scholars coming out and saying that any kind of rape, the fault is the woman's, not the man's, because the woman is always the one who is tempting the man. So we actually had a very famous gang rape case in Australia involving Muslims, and Sheikh there, the head of the Islamic congregations in Australia, a guy named Sheikh Hilali, came out and said that it's cat meat. Women are cat meat, and if the cat grabs the meat, then it's not the fault of the cat, it's the fault of the person who put the meat out there. And you see similar language coming out of Muslim clerics, Muslim societies in general, where they compare, for example, women to a lollipop. And if you cover the lollipop, the flies don't go on it. If you uncover the lollipop, the flies go on it. When you understand why these Muslims come into Europe and they start assaulting women in swimming pools, it's because they've been taught this logic. When you have this mass sexual assault of women and girls in the UK and in Europe, what's the thinking behind it? Well, the thinking behind it is that these women are, they're there, they're available. In some sense, they're not being protected by men, they're not in the home, which means that we can't control ourselves. In Christianity and Judaism, there's an emphasis on the individual to control himself. In Islam, it's the opposite. It says that a man cannot control himself. Muhammad, the perfect man in their Quranic scriptures, would not control himself. In fact, when he wanted a woman, then Allah would actually connive to get him a woman, to get him that woman. One of the more famous cases is Muhammad really decides he wants his daughter-in-law, who is married to his adopted son. So, they go ahead and they throw out this whole idea that adoption even exists. So adoption in Islam is not legal because Muhammad really, really wanted his daughter-in-law. This is the entire reasoning of Islam, where a man has absolutely no control. If he sees a woman, he has to have her. That's why women have to wear a hijab. That's why they have to wear a burqa. That's why they can't leave the house. Which, of course, is also why Muslim men feel empowered and entitled to attack women anytime they see them. And it's also, of course, why a woman has to be beaten. It's why a woman has to be have her genitals mutilated, because women are absolutely untrustworthy. Women are just this focal form of desire. You actually had in Iran these discussions about whether women's hair emitted these rays that just go straight up and incite men with desire. And if these rays just really go up into the sky and passing planes, men in passing planes can be influenced by these rays from women's hair. I mean, this sounds completely psychotically insane, but this is the Islamic thinking. So you have to repress women. And at the same time, you have to assault women because men themselves have no control whatsoever. So FGM, domestic violence, horrific crimes against women all come from the same Islamic principle. And unless you deal with this ideology, unless you deal with the foundational understandings of what makes Muslim men do these things, you are getting nowhere.
Enraging and infuriating and depressing. It's interesting if somebody took the time to investigate and research the hijab and its origins. This buddy of Muhammad's was telling him, you got to cover those women in the field, because I gotta figure out which ones are yours. So let's put some, black garbage bags on the women that I can't rape and molest out there, But we wouldn't really want to look into the origins of that. But Islamic verses and Quranic verses are very clear on if a woman is not wearing that, then there might very well be a right to molest and rape her, which explains why members and followers of the religion of peace think that they can rape women that aren't wearing the hijab. But we've covered this a lot. We'll continue to discuss it. Just heartbreaking. But in terms of FGM and just how the media covers it, again, to exonerate Islam, and you show this in your work, there was a Swiss case of a mother mutilating her two daughters, and the media and the authorities and the people that are covering it, they're saying that this is happening in Switzerland. It's a Swiss case. It's a Swiss woman, but it's a Somali woman in Switzerland that's following the Quran. And in the UK, in terms of the Muslim rape gangs there, they keep calling them Asians. Maybe some people start thinking that these people are from China or something. The left is very clever how it keeps covering these stories, right, Daniel?
Oh yeah, I love the Asian, all these Asian gangs. It's not the Chinese who are throwing acid in women's faces. They're not the ones who are trafficking thousands and tens of thousands of girls. But yes, they engage in all these sorts of distractions and diversions to avoid naming the problem. So the UN database of FGM includes Switzerland on the list, includes America on the list, includes pretty much every European country on the list. And yet you get the idea, well, this is just a global problem. You've got FGM in America. But, who's doing FGM in America? Well, it turns out you have to look at places like Minnesota and Ohio and places that have a sizable number of Somali Muslims and other African Muslims who are the main perpetrators of this. So it's not an American problem. It's certainly not a Swiss problem when the Somali woman does this to her kids. It's a Muslim problem. And we can't say that, so we have to dance in circles to avoid that.
Yeah, well, we have to, because the left is very clever. There's a million reasons here, but one of the things it's done is it racialized Islam. Islam is not a religion. Islam is not a race, but they've racialized Islam. So Islam is the poor and the downtrodden minorities of color. So if you try to point at Islam, you're a white supremacist. So, and this is part of the problem when I've gone in my efforts to try to protect Muslim girls and say to people, look what Islam is doing. They can't, because if they start engaging in that, the finger will be pointed at them. You're a white supremacist, and they just can't have it. And let the Muslim girls be female genitally mutilated. They don't care, as long as they're not called a racist. And so speaking of the fear of being called a racist, it's not just in UK now, it's not in Europe. I don't know how many neighborhoods and places in the US are going to be left soon. You write about how in Virginia, they're now criminalizing opposition to Islam. This could even be in a casual conversation. Daniel, even the conversation me and you just had on this show, if we have this even casually in a bar or a restaurant and a person's listening and reports us, we might actually go to jail. This is Virginia, correct?
So to look at the big picture for a moment here, there's been this big push by Islamists to create this thing, this concept called Islamophobia. Now, what's different about Islamophobia from, let's say, racism, anti-Semitism, which is directed at individuals from a particular group? You might argue about whether we should have hate crime laws in general, but the difference with Islam is it's phobia of Islam, not Muslims. It's not anti-Muslim, it's anti-Islam. Now, what happened in Europe with that, for example, in the UK, is that then any criticism of Islam itself becomes a dangerous form of hate, which they can restrict. So you actually have a man being put on trial in the UK for burning a Quran because he committed an offense, I'm quoting, he committed an offense against the religious institution of Islam. This is why actually any kind of legislation around Islamophobia is very dangerous. And Virginia began pushing, you have this Senator Saddam, State Senator Saddam, this Muslim state senator, introduced a bill to create a definition of Islamophobia. Now, this definition is absolutely not necessary for prosecuting any assaults on Muslims. First of all, if you assault anybody, it's already illegal, though Virginia Democrats who have taken over are now trying to make violent assaults and other crimes legal, but that's a whole other story. But beyond that, if you assault a Muslim because he's a Muslim, if you punch him in the face, it is already a hate crime. There's no need to introduce a definition of Islamophobia. What this does is it actually creates a crime for doing anything negative about Islam, which is, of course, is the larger point. They're not actually trying to protect Muslims from violence. They're trying to protect Islam from any kind of negative criticism. And this is really crucial because this is the next step to introducing Sharia, to introducing Islamic law, which is, the big agenda for Islam, is to create a special and distinct status for Islam to ban any kind of criticism of Islam. They've done this using violence. So many American newspapers after the Charlie Hebdo attacks would not run any kind of cartoons of Muhammad. CNN would not actually show them uncensored. We have media that will show anything uncensored. They will not show a picture of Muhammad uncensored, as you know very well. And this created the special and distinct status for Islam through violence. The next step is to use Islamophobia to create a special and distinct status for Islam through American legislation. And this is what the Virginia bill opens the door to doing. It opens the door to going ahead and saying that law enforcement is now being told that any criticism of Islam is effectively a hate crime. Now, on paper, there's still the United States Constitution. There is the First Amendment. There is all the stuff. But, the local law enforcement, local DAs are going to define things based on how they understand them. And they're not being told that any kind of negative attitude toward Islam is itself a hate crime, which, of course, opens the door to prosecuting people for burning a Quran, for speaking negatively about Islam, as we are doing.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, I even have people in my extended family. I have in my circle of acquaintances and people I know. Many of these people are complicit in taking down our civilization until their dying breath, with a jihadist with a sword standing right over them about to chop their head off because of Surah 47:4, they will be saying, Islam is a religion of peace. Islam is a religion of peace. And then the sword will come down. Leftism is a... Pardon?
That's the peace that Islam has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And the leftist is ready to die for his and her political faith. Daniel, we got to go. People that love you and follow you and might not know everywhere to follow you, what do they do?
Well, they can benefit from reading frontpagemag.com, and they can find both of us there, and they can also find a copy of Somalimerica, and they can also find a copy of United in Hate.
I really like how United in Hate is on your mind, and you holding my book in your hand brings me a lot of joy. And I'm very grateful to the wonderful review that you wrote of my book that appeared in the American Thinker lately. Thank you, Daniel.
It's more than deserved. Thank you.
Daniel, you are a hero, a gentleman, and a scholar. Keep up the great work. Thank you for joining the Glazov Gang. We'll see you soon. Good night.